Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Mr. Kelleher, it is a pleasure to have you back on the show. You've been on a couple of times. We've kind of covered the globe. For the maybe new listeners out there, do you mind introducing yourself?
Oh, okay, right. No, I wrote a book on the Kennedy assassination. He was expendable. And I've been working on this probably since November 22nd, 1963, because I was out at lunch and I was over at the RCA building in New York City when the news came across a teletype machine, shots fired at the president's motorcade. So it got me started right there and then. And so I put this book together about 8, 9 years ago. He was expendable. And one of the things that I tried to do in this book was to aggregate the data. You know, if you want to talk about how many police were in the basement when Oswald was shot, I've got every police officer that was in the basement listed in appendices in the book. There's all kinds of aggregation of the data that's extremely important and can be used by other researchers. So I think that, and I did a couple of podcasts for you already. So that's a pretty good background as it is.
I have to ask about what your thoughts are on trusting eyewitness and ear witness testimony. Obviously, that's a little bit hazy depending on if a person has combat experience or, there's many other factors that go in there. But overall, people say you can't trust it. In my opinion, based on some of the documentation I've read from the FBI where statements were left out of reports that I feel like were crucial information, I think you have to give a little bit more credence to eyewitness and ear witness testimony. And like
Oh, agree.
with your book and times you've been on, you've referenced exactly what this came from, what exhibit from the Warren Commission, and you stated their exact thing. It's not like they were hiding conspiracy. It's there. There's a lot of things where I'm like, why didn't they pursue that? And I wanted to get your thoughts on eyewitness, ear witness testimony, and then obviously certain statements and depositions from people that would be like, why wasn't this ever investigated?
Well, I think that the eyewitness testimony is extremely important. I mean, all you have to do is even think about the reaction of the crowd that day in running to the knoll. I mean, this was a normal human response to what they were feeling, that those shots came from the knoll area. And I do give credence to ear witness testimony and eyewitness testimony. And I think one of the things that you would find in my book is I have documented all of the witnesses who said the shots came from the knoll area. There were 64 of them. The Warren Commission only came up with a handful of witnesses claiming that a shot came from the knoll. Well, that's totally wrong. And, one of the other things that you go back and you think about was people who reported seeing smoke from the knoll, people who reported smelling gunpowder odor from the knoll. The interesting thing is smoke from the knoll in the knoll area was extremely important. Oswald, according to the commission, was 6 floors up in the Texas School Book Depository. If he was firing a rifle from that room, from that floor, the odor of gunpowder would not float down to the grassy knoll. Smoke goes up, not down. So you can't leave that information out. And that's one of the big things that they did. There's a lot of aspects to this that people saw and reported that need to be aggregated. And that's one of the things that I did in my book. I've got a number of charts in there and appendices. I talk about all of the people who reported different gunfire sounds. Most of the people who reported different gunfire sounds were either Secret Service agents or Dallas police officers. These are people who are used to using firearms, who have the ability to distinguish the firing of different types of weapons. And that's one of the things that they reported. That the early shots were fired by one weapon and later shots were fired by another weapon, that there were different gunfire sounds. So when you add all of that up, you have to take these things into account, because one of the great things about this, when you review all of these different factors, they are all reinforcing the theory of a shot coming from the knoll. Okay, and that's one of the interesting aspects of this. They don't contradict the idea that a shot came from the knoll. If this information was bad information, badly organized, badly analyzed, you're going to have a great deal of variance in what the information is saying. But you don't have that. What you have is a consistent verification, consistent support for the idea that the shots came from the knoll as well as the Texas School Book Depository. Then you got to go back to one other interesting thing. If you read all of the testimony of the FBI questioning the witnesses in Dealey Plaza who reported gunshot sounds, the FBI never asked the question, do you think the shots came from more than one place? They never asked that. They kind of forced all these witnesses into, oh, it came from here. This was the only place that the shot came from. And anything else that they may have said was totally left out. Then you also have to go to the fact, and this is very interesting. In 1963, in Dealey Plaza, on November 22nd, there were 3 women standing very close to the parade route, and they were together. And they all thought that the shots came from the knoll area, but their testimony was disregarded by the FBI because they were women. They don't know anything about guns. Women don't know anything about guns. They don't know anything about shooting. You know, you got a perfect example of 1963 sexism here. Keep in mind one thing about Texas. A lot of people in Texas owned firearms. A lot of fathers in Texas took their daughters out shooting. They did know about firearms, and they had an idea of where shots might be coming from when they heard the weapons fired. But the FBI disregarded all of that. And one of the things I wanted to just kind of bring up today, there's about 7 important witnesses, I think, that were completely disregarded by the Warren Commission, not called by the Warren Commission, or results of their testimony were not followed up on. And there's several of these, and they fit into a pattern that we consistently see over and over again. One witness will give us a description of an event that occurred on September 25th, 1963, that could involve the theory of an Oswald lookalike. We've had a lot of reports of Oswald lookalikes. This fits right in there. The second one is another example of the FBI telling a witness, oh, you didn't see that. That couldn't have happened. What you're reporting didn't happen. You didn't see that. Then you also have other reports that were done. And in this case, it's a Secret Service where the investigation was incomplete, and there's a taint of racism in the Secret Service report because of one of the witnesses. And then finally, one of the things I want to just kind of wind up with was 4 witnesses with connections potentially to the CIA who were never called by the Warren Commission. And that raises the question of why. Okay, so let me start with this first one.
Before you hop into those real quick, I just want to ask, when you're looking for documentation, the Warren Commission did print a lot of stuff that is you can take to be why didn't you ever pursue that? But what about altered statements of witnesses? I started noticing this doing clips about the witnesses that were either on the, let's talk about the best example would be the triple underpass or triple overpass, whatever one you want to say. Everyone up there basically saw smoke come from the knoll, and a lot of people ran over there. James Leon Simmons, SM Holland, Calvin Dodd. There's a bunch of people that saw something from that area, and they talked about seeing footprints in the mud, and they talked about, something that would be like, that has to be investigated. They went there with police officers. Well, when they gave their FBI statements, if they gave an FBI statement, they specifically said that they stated that to Mark Lane on video. That's on video, them saying that. But when you're looking at their FBI statement, it says that they heard the shots, whether it was 2 or whether it was 3 or whether they couldn't tell where it came from. They never mentioned, depending on the statement, I think with Simmons they didn't, James Leon Simmons they didn't, and Calvin Dodd they didn't. SM Holland they definitely didn't do, because he even told Mark Lane that he told them this and they did not put that in the report. But they never mentioned like the smoke of coming from behind the trees. And if they do say that they saw something or they heard something, they say west of the Texas School Book Depository. They always mention the Texas School Book Depository. They don't go near the park, near the plaza, near the knoll, near the fence, near the railroad track. They say near or west, north, south, east of the Texas School Book Depository.
Yeah, that's a landmark that they consistently use.
So, and then they always end on a final question. A witness states that they had no relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald and hadn't seen him before his TV or broadcast of his image on television. So they always knock off that last question. But when it comes to altered statements, when you're using those as sources, you're mentioning the 64 people that saw something from the knoll. It could possibly be more because some either people weren't interviewed. But how do you trust their statements? You're going off like those statements. Like, do you know about the alteration of evidence? Like, did you have to look at multiple different reports? I was trusting the FBI's statements and using those. And then that's when I started realizing that some of these railroad workers' statements didn't match up with the FBI reports that were written about them. And I realized now I have to kind of look over all available documentation, whether they gave it to the Dallas police, which is a very half-ass report. But it's a report that, enlightens you a little bit more detail than the FBI did.
Well, the important thing is that not only do you have the Warren Commission statements, the FBI statements that they took, but you also have many of these witnesses spoke directly to the press. You also have a number of these people who were filmed. There were filmed interviews of these people. Some of them were done by Mark Lane. As a matter of fact, the people you just mentioned that were all on top of the triple overpass, Mark Lane made actual filmed interviews with every single one of them. So you've got multiple sources that you can go to make sure that what they're saying is consistent.
Yeah, like Charles Brem interview with the press the day of, and then his later interview with Mark Lane is almost exactly the same.
Well, you're going to run into that, and that's where you would have to point that out when but generally speaking, what I found was that there was a lot of consistency in these eyewitness testimonies about the location of the shots. There are going to be some variations in there, but you have to be careful to go in and examine in detail everything they had to say and every statement that they made. And if there are interviews, if there other than the FBI, if there are film clips of them speaking, bring all of that in and look at all of the available information, not just one FBI report. I agree with you. The FBI changed some of this stuff. There's no doubt about that. And that's a problem that came up all throughout this report. A number of witnesses have come back and said, I never said that to the FBI. They changed what I said. So there's a real problem with that. That would be a whole separate category in and of itself, to go back and put all those FBI reports that witnesses claimed were changed put them all in one place, and that would give you a bet. That's what I mean by aggregating the data. That gives you a better opportunity to get a feel for what happened and how often this happened, and maybe could even give you some indication of why it happened. So I think that's important. I agree with what you're saying. You do need to look at more than one source here, not just the FBI report.
Do you think it was a lot like how the Warren Commission was a cast of 13 members with like, not 13 members, it was a cast of people with very specific military careers, or they had a large, extensive background where nobody would really question their judgment? The FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There's a myth about the FBI, which is like whenever you go, FBI comes on screens, partly J. Edgar Hoover's influence into Hollywood, but they're going to get the job done. They're going to do their work. They're going to get to the bottom of this crime or whatever it is. Well, you have all these areas not being investigated in there. You can go super conspiracy with it and say it's all a giant cover up. But also, what about the Hoover or the Katzenbach memo? I mean, they had their decision within 48 hours, or that there was no, it
Well,
was just
Hoover pushed that through.
yeah, it was just
You're
Oswald
absolutely correct.
alone. So you got to think the fear that Hoover had and all the people in the FBI that were afraid of Hoover. Well, here's the mission. Evidence is Oswald did it. You don't need anything else. Everything has to point towards Oswald did it. So they just never pursued any of these areas where we would think a Federal Bureau of Investigation would.
Well, the interesting thing about it is they did this within 48 hours, and they cut off all kinds of productive routes that the FBI local agents were pursuing. Hoover cut it all off. This is it, 48 hours. You got to keep in mind one thing. Oswald, the FBI wanted to portray as a lone wolf. That's good for the FBI, because how in the world can the FBI prevent some guy from getting up in the morning and saying, I'm going to assassinate the president today? Okay? It's almost impossible to do. This actually absolved the FBI. They didn't uncover the plot ahead of time. They didn't arrest the conspirators ahead of time. They didn't prevent the assassination. So, in other words, if you could just blame this all on one guy, you immediately absolve the FBI of any responsibility of investigating and uncovering a conspiracy before it was able to kill the president. So they're in the clear. So Oswald is the perfect patsy for this. He's the perfect guy. He's the only one involved. Nobody else was involved. There are no other connections. We couldn't possibly have known this ahead of time. He just gets up in the morning, leaves his wedding ring with his wife and $100 and some odd, and then leaves, picks up his weapon, and goes and kills the president. Who could prevent that?
Now, I believe those interviews, that official Oswald did it thing, that was just for the witnesses and a lot of the things that were going on in Dealey Plaza, where you go, you should have gotten more information. Because one thing, if it is a lone assassin and they had their guy and they didn't need to look anywhere else, they were still investigating claims months later. Because I found a report from Miss C.A. Her name's C.A. Starlin. She had been contacted by the FBI, I think it was 4 or 5 months later, and they were investigating her because she had sent a telegram the day of the assassination to her uncle. And the telegram stated, congratulations, you did it. And it was in reference to the assassination. Her uncle happened to work for the Federal Reserve, and apparently this is documented. I have the clip on my YouTube you can look at. It's documented that they both shared a disgust for the Kennedy administration, but she said it was a joke and it was in bad taste. But the FBI was still pursuing claims later. There's that with A.D. Hodge as well, too. We talked about him a little bit off air, but he has another claim about a kid that worked for him that apparently, a gun went missing from his gun shop slash bar. And he thought it was the kid, but the kid had communist views and was saying things about Kennedy. That claim was pursued by the FBI, but then it just kind of dropped. But they were still looking into other areas of potential conspirators, where I was like, if it's Oswald, why are you guys still investigating any of these claims? You just chalk them off like you did a lot of the witness statements the day of.
Well, I think it just comes back to this was a self-protective response by the FBI. When you get into, I mentioned this in the book that there was some, reactions. There were political protective responses, bureaucratic protective responses. Take Johnson as an example. He wanted to get this report out of the way. He wanted it was a political protective response. Let's get the report out of the way. I'm running for president in November 1964. There's a presidential election. I want to get this done and finished. I don't want this in there as a part of the presidential campaign. We want to just put this baby to bed here. Then you had Robert Kennedy trying to protect the legacy of his brother. I mean, one of the first things he does is he goes to the White House and grabs all the ushers' logs so that we would never know all the visitors that went in to see John Kennedy, over the term of his presidency. And he's trying to protect his brother's liaison with maybe additional women and so on. So you have all these responses, and the FBI's response is a bureaucratic protective response. They want to protect their power, want to protect their influence, protect their reputation. And what you need to do is just find there's only one guy involved. There's no way we could have prevented this crime. You even got it going on today, with all of this bickering about who was responsible for this latest assassination attempt on President Trump. All of this backbiting and so on that's going on. The key point simply is all these agencies are out to protect their reputation, their money, their power, and they'll do whatever they have to do to protect their fiefdoms. And so the key point simply is you're going to consistently run into this as a problem in these kind of investigations. And we clearly see it in the Kennedy investigation. Then again, there's also the Warren Commission itself. When you go through this Warren Commission report, I've been through the 26 volumes. I read it twice, and I've looked at probably several thousand documents in there as well. One of the things you consistently find every time there's any hint of conspiracy, cut the investigation off, truncate it right now. Don't go there. And so basically, what you wind up with is a manipulated investigation, which whitewashed any conspiracy and focused entirely on Oswald and made him the fall guy for the entire assassination of President Kennedy. In the meantime, when you go back and you look at examples of what went on, witnesses who were not called by the Warren Commission, you say to yourself, wow, when I go back and I look at what these people had to say, how come they weren't called? Why wasn't this followed up? I mean, there are all kinds of leads that should have been followed up that weren't, simply because one of the things that you'll always find is a characteristic of the stuff that's not followed up is they hinted at, they sort of pointed at a conspiracy. As soon as it went in that direction, bingo, they dropped it, they truncated it, they cut it right off. That's a big problem. And so you wind up where we are today, where we've got more questions than we have answers.
Now, through this is going to be my last kind of touch on question to this, but do you believe that some of these mysterious deaths that eventually happened, do you believe in that at all, that there was people getting knocked off or some weird things happen? You don't have to agree with the official, I think, whatever Jim Mars claimed or anything, 100 and something. But there's a certain few, like Jim Cothey, who died of a throat chop, who was in Jack Ruby's apartment with Bill Hunter and George Senator. Bill Hunter obviously died, was a heart attack. There's weird things that started happening to certain witnesses where I start kind of wondering, and I put a little bit more weight into the theory after looking at the number of altercations and kind of evidence stuff that wasn't pursued by the certain investigations. Dorothy Kilgallen's a great example of a mysterious death.
Let me answer you this way. I don't want to get into, can I prove all of these shootings and potential murders and what? Let me say this about it. If you go back to Dallas in 1963, there was a tremendous climate of fear in the city of Dallas. There was a lot of anger, racism. You know, you had reports that members of the Dallas Police Department were members of the Ku Klux Klan. When I was talking to Bob Blakey, one of the things Blakey said to me was the Dallas Police Department was a corrupt organization. Okay. Now, I think that this kind of filters in to down to the average witness. Take this guy, Domingo Benavides, who was on the scene when Oswald was involved in the shootout with Tippit. Now, the first thing that he said was, as soon as I heard the shooting, I hit the floor of my truck and I stayed there. And he always said he could never identify any of the people that were at the scene, that he could definitely not say that it was Oswald who did the shooting. Now, in the back of my mind, and I can't prove any of this, and I want to say that, in the back of my mind, I have to think to myself, look, this was a Mexican American living in Dallas in 1963. Was this a good place for a Mexican American to be living? And here's a guy who was just an average guy trying to go to work every day, make a few bucks, get by, and be able to, take care of his family. And he wasn't looking for getting involved in this kind of a major situation, particularly with the racial situation that existed in Dallas at that time in 63. And I also think to myself, one of the things that people would have thought at that time, and I remember reading a quote the other day, anybody can be murdered. Well, just apply that to Benavides, right? Here he is, he's just this ordinary little guy. And all of a sudden, he's now in a circumstance where he's asked to identify somebody who's involved in the murder of a police officer, during which the president of the United States is also involved. He's murdered in the streets of Dallas, shot down like a dog in daylight. What hope, what protection does a guy like Benavides have? I mean, this guy would be afraid to open his mouth. And it also comes back to, there's another example of this that's always in the back of my mind.
Hold on, Benavides, Benavides, his twin brother was shot and killed, right?
Exactly. Okay. I mean, yeah, you've got that in there. And so he's, why would he actually come out and say, yeah, oh yeah, this was Oswald, I saw him. Boy, better just not to know exactly what took place. I didn't see anything. And it also carries over to another guy I was thinking about too. Remember Officer McLean? He's the one whose motorcycle taped the shots.
Oh, yeah.
Now, later, at first, he said, "Yeah, I was on that motorcycle when he was testifying before the House Select Committee on Assassinations." Then later on, he came out and he said, "No way! What couldn't have been my motorcycle? Didn't happen. My bike wasn't recording the shots. All that information is incorrect." And I often thought to myself, wow, what was this guy? Was this guy afraid? Did he change that testimony later on because he realized that he was an important link in saying that there was a conspiracy to kill the president? He becomes one of those targets, that he heard so much about, all those people being shot and killed, that Is that what made him change his testimony? Was he, here he is, he's part of the Dallas Police Department, right? Oswald is protected by over 50 police officers in the Dallas basement, yet Jack Ruby walks right in and shoots and kills Oswald. Did McLean think, wow, if they can do that to Oswald, if they can kill Kennedy in the streets of Dallas, what could they do to me? So I think that there was this, without getting into credence about who shot who or whether these cases are real and connected to the Kennedy assassination, there was this incredible climate of fear in Dallas. And, one of the things that interested me was Helen Markham. And she was soundly criticized as a screwball, a nutcase, a witness you couldn't depend upon. But here's this woman who's on the way to work. She's a waitress. She's not well educated. She wasn't represented by an attorney when she testified before the Warren Commission. She's there at a presidential commission investigating the murder of the President of the United States. Should she be nervous? Should she be frightened? When you look at the climate of hate that existed in Dallas, it's amazing this woman was even able to testify. And also, I would say, people have to ask themselves, you're on the way to work. While you're waiting for the bus to come, you see a police officer across the street shot down in cold blood. The killer comes back after leaving the scene for a couple of seconds, comes back and shoots the police officer in the head. What kind of effect would that have on you personally after you witnessed this? Would you be a little shook up, a little uncoordinated maybe in your testimony? Would you be a little bit confused? People have long-term traumatic effects from these kinds of circumstances. And so she would be no different. So I think we have to take into account what was going on in Dallas in 1963. To leave that out, I think makes it less possible for us to see the position that these witnesses were actually placed in. I mean, here you have the President of the United States murdered in the streets of Dallas, shot down like a dog in broad daylight in front of hundreds of people, captured by the media, filmed by a number of people on the scene with movie cameras. And now think about the average little guy. What is his position going to be in this if he finds himself or herself in the position of being a witness to this murder and expected to testify about it? Are these people going to be afraid? So I think there is this is an area that we really have to be careful about, maybe some deviation in the way people may have testified, or maybe they made statements that weren't always consistent. We have to take that into account. We can't just dismiss them because of some inconsistency. So I think all of what you point out, all those stories in the background would only emphasize and influence the kind of fears that some of these people were experiencing. So I think it's something that cannot be discarded. I think it's very important.
Before we get into the 7 witnesses that you have there, I just wanted to add on one major point, which is if you look at the number of people that worked at the Texas School Book Depository that were African American, you start to understand why none of them didn't recall seeing Oswald that day, or didn't know Oswald, never spoken to him. Why would you want to be associated with a cop killer? There's that a lot of people don't look at that, but doing the witness testimonies and everything and doing it in a video format, when I look at their photo, I'm like, Why would you ever, if you're in a racist part of Dallas or, whatever the climate was in Dallas back then, Birchers, why would you say that you knew Oswald or had a lunch with Oswald or ever spoke to Oswald?
Absolutely. No, I agree with you 100%. I think that this is an important factor, especially as you mentioned, what black witnesses would want to get involved in this situation in terms of a cop killer. You're absolutely correct. So I think that's something we have to take into account.
Now,
The climate of fear.
the 7 witnesses you have listed there, is one of them Jim Braden?
No.
Do you know who Jim Braden is, though?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Mafia connected
Yeah.
from LA.
I saw that. I was like, wait, he was at the JFK and the RFK? I was like, all right, that's suspicious as hell for me. I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely.
you could say
Yeah.
coincidence, but
And,
damn.
and he just happens to be in the Dow Tex building.
If anything, he should have just got a job as a reporter. He would have got the inside scoop on both those things.
No doubt about it.
All right,
No doubt about it.
let's get into your 7 witnesses.
Well, let me, and I'll make them as quick as I can here for you because I think we're kind of ways into this already. One of them is a woman by the name of Lee Danley. Now, she's an example of the Oswald lookalike problem. Okay, she worked for the administrative division of the Selective Service in Austin, Texas. What we used to call on the local level the draft board. Okay, and she said that on September 25th, keep this date in mind, September 25th, 1963, an individual by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald came into her office in Austin. And the reason that he came in was that he had just come from Governor Connolly's office. He was trying to get help because he received a dishonorable discharge from the Marine Corps. Connolly's office said they couldn't help him. So they sent him over to the Selective Service Division. And she said that she was able to locate a file on Lee Oswald. And she told him that in the circumstances that he was asking for help, she would be unable to help him. But the FBI, she made the report about this to the FBI, and the FBI showed her a photograph of Oswald. And she said, that's the guy who came to my office on September 25th, 1963, in Austin, Texas. That's a problem because she's saying he was in Austin, Texas on September 25th. The Warren Commission said Oswald was on the way to Mexico City on September 25th. And on September 25th, Sylvia Odio and her husband Annie reported that Oswald was one of 3 men who visited their apartment in Dallas. So on September 25th, Oswald was in Austin, he was in Dallas, and on the way to Mexico City. So you got a problem here. And the problem that I see here with this is I got to ask this question because there's not enough information to solve it. Okay. The question that you have to ask is, was this some type of disinformation campaign? Was this a way to befuddle any investigation of Oswald's activities on that particular day? Once again, we lack the data to answer the question, but we're left with the feeling something else was going on. Was Mrs. Danley called by the Warren Commission? The answer is no.
Well, look at the guy, Donald Wainhouse, I think his name is, one of the people arrested by Dallas police officers. He looks a lot like Oswald. I mean, damn near looks identical, maybe a little bit shorter. But he was arrested, brought into custody, and then he was released later on. And that's one of like I think two people that I've come across that were arrested the same day within like an hour of the assassination. It wasn't until Lee Harvey Oswald was actually like in custody, and I think he was there for a little bit that they started releasing these people, saying, "Oh, we got our guy already."
Well, this is a consistent problem that comes up with this lookalike situation. And even this guy Crayford that worked for Jack Ruby could have been mistaken for Oswald.
Larry
What's her
Crayford?
name? Larry Crayford?
Yeah, Larry Crayford.
Yeah. Mrs. Payne, when she was shown pictures of him, said at first she was struck by how much he looked like Oswald. And you know, he was with Ruby on a couple of other occasions where where at the locations where he was seen by others, they thought it might have been Oswald. And then you had reports about Oswald being seen in Ruby's club. Well, maybe it was Crayford. We don't know. Okay. Once again, we don't have the information. Now we got an example of you didn't see what you saw. The FBI telling the witness, you didn't see what you saw. Okay. And this guy is a guy by the name of Clifford Chastain. You ever hear this name? Cliff's Barbershop in Irving, Texas. And he said that Oswald came in on a couple of occasions for a haircut, and Chastain cut his hair. And he had been at the shop several times. There was another barber there that backed up what Chastain had to say, a guy by the name of Bert Elmo Glover. He also cut Oswald's hair. But the story that Chastain tells is that on one occasion, Oswald came in with a 14-year-old boy. And the kid started spouting off that the United States is a place that should have only one leader. The rich have too much money, the poor have too little money. In other words, he had a whole socialist tone to his discussion, and it was really aggravating Chastain. Now, the kid was never located. They never located the kid. Another situation, you got another that you got to ask yourself this question. One of the things we know as political scientists from political socialization studies, kids mimic their parents' political views. So one of the best polls you can take is go to the local high school or local elementary school and ask all the kids who they're going to vote for in the presidential election. What do you think they're going to reflect? Their parents' views. Okay. So you got to ask yourself, if this kid was spouting off socialist views, what was he doing with Oswald? Who were his parents? Why would his parents leave the kid in company with Oswald to travel around, go get a haircut, whatever it is, and then spout off all these socialist views?
Well, we know who
It
he is
was,
now.
yeah,
He
the
was the
kid was never located.
No, we know who he is now. He came out already. He's the guy from Star. Yeah, he's the guy from Star Wars. Isn't that crazy? I swear to you, I don't know the specific character that he plays. I think it's one of the fighter pilot guys, but he has openly stated about it. He didn't come out about it until he was interviewed, like obviously way after the fact. But he talked about it that he was that he was that boy.
So who was his parents?
Oh, I don't know. I don't even know his
What was he?
name.
What was he? What was he doing with Oswald?
I've been told his name multiple times. I got to look this back up. That's a great clip
Okay.
right there.
Well, at the time they never located him. So this was another dead end investigation that went nowhere. And the interesting thing about this is going back to Chastain. Okay. Chastain owned a number of rental units in that Irving area. He knew a lot of people in their area. He knew Ruth Payne. He knew Oswald was staying at Payne's house. His brother-in-law lived across the street from Ruth Payne. And one of the things that Chastain said was he saw Oswald driving a blue or green and white 1955 Chevrolet station wagon. He also knew Marina Oswald. He saw her and Oswald together at local drugstores. Now, one of the things the FBI told Chastain was he couldn't have seen Oswald driving a car simply because Oswald didn't drive. Going back to your earlier statement about the FBI changing testimony or contradicting the testimony of individuals who stated that they saw certain things. Here they're telling Chastain, you didn't see what you saw. They also did that to somebody else that comes to mind right away. That was Governor Connolly. Didn't the FBI say you were not hit by the second bullet? You were hit by the first bullet? The Warren Commission tell him that? Even till the day he died, Governor Connolly insisted he was hit by the second bullet, not by the first bullet.
So did
You know,
some
the
of the Warren
so-called
Commission
magic
members, like John Sherman Cooper and John McCloy. Even though McCloy was very big on supporting the commission's findings, they didn't believe the single bullet theory, and most of the commission members didn't believe the single bullet theory.
Well, in other words, basically, here's an example of what you were talking about with the FBI telling, as an example, a witness that they didn't see what they saw. And that happened quite a bit, more than we would like to think. Let me go to the CIA witnesses. You're familiar with J. Walton Moore, right?
Yeah.
J. Walton Moore was connected with the Mordenshield. And the Mordenshield told a number of people that he had a relationship with the CIA for over 20 years. And when he returned from a trip to Yugoslavia, he met in Dallas with J. Walton Moore, who apparently debriefed the Mordenshield for the CIA. And at the time that he met with Moore, J. Walton Moore, Moore told him that he knew a Marine living in Dallas who had defected to the Soviet Union. And he later on gave additional information about Oswald to the Mordenshield and gave the Mordenshield Oswald's address and actually suggested that the Mordenshield go and visit Oswald. You got to, this raises the question, was the Mordenshield debriefing Oswald for the CIA? Now, we know that he did ultimately form a friendship with Oswald and actually did deliver financial assistance to Marina Oswald. Okay, now the real problem here is this. The Mordenshield also knew about Oswald's attempt on General Walker's life. You know about the whole situation where he went in and he asked him, how did you miss General Walker? And he knew about the rifle, and his wife also knew about the rifle. And that raises the question, if he was asked to contact Oswald by J. Walton Moore, what information did the Mordenshield feed back to J. Walton Moore? What info did he give him back? And, you know, one of the things that I often thought about was, did he mention anything about the potential attempt on General Walker's life to Moore? Did he feed that information back to the CIA? Did the CIA potentially use that information to manipulate Oswald in some way, shape, or form? Now, during the HSC investigation, James Wilcott, a CIA finance officer, testified before the House Select Committee on Assassinations and told him that he handled funding for a CIA project in which Oswald was recruited. He also told the HSCA the following: the CIA had some type of control over Oswald because the agency knew that Oswald had committed a serious crime. Now, he gave this information to, this is reported by Anthony Summers in his book Conspiracy, the definitive book. It's on page 129 if anybody wants to check it. J. Walton Moore, who lived in Dallas, had an office in Dallas on Irvay Street, very close to Jack Ruby's Carousel Club, was never called by the Warren Commission, never asked any questions. And I think this was a really productive witness, somebody that should have been. I mean, why was he even telling de Mordenschild to hook up with Oswald? What information did de Mordenschild feed back to J. Walton Moore? What information did Moore pass on to the CIA? How was that information used? Once again, we got all the questions, no answers. Okay, and this is something that should have been looked into. Moore should have been questioned by the Warren Commission. Got to ask the question, why didn't the Warren Commission call him? They knew about this. I mean, if you go back and read de Mordenschild's testimony, he's got about 200 pages worth of testimony before the Warren Commission.
But
They knew it.
He defended Oswald, though.
Yeah, he definitely did. And so the key point simply is, I mean, and this is a guy that had, de Mordenschild had some number of contacts. He knew Jacqueline Kennedy since she was a kid. He was at a dinner at Jacqueline Kennedy's mother's house while Dulles was there. Dulles was even asking him questions about Oswald.
He stayed in a dorm with H.W. Bush.
He's hooked up with him. And, his wife was reported to have known Richard Helms and David Atlee Phillips. Does that ring a bell? David Atlee Phillips, alleged Maurice Bishop, Antonio Viciana.
He's the best newspaper editor. Good for propaganda.
Yeah, so this guy had some incredible connections. But here's this guy, J. Walton Moore, connected to the CIA, never called by the Warren Commission, and yet they had all this information on him. Another guy, as an example, that was also very interesting, William Goudet. Goudet was a guy who observed Oswald and Guy Bannister walking along in the streets of New Orleans, and also saw Oswald in Bannister's office. Now, according to Dr. Michael Kurtz, who did a lot of investigative work on Oswald and the CIA's role potentially in the assassination, Goudet also knew David Atlee Phillips. He worked for Phillips, as an example, back in 1954 when they were trying to overthrow the Guatemalan government. Now, in an interview with Anthony Summers in 1978, Goudet admitted that he was associated with the CIA for over 20 years. And the interesting thing about Goudet was that on September 17th, 1963, he went to the Mexican consul's office in New Orleans to apply for a tourist visa to Mexico on the same day as Lee Harvey Oswald. There were 5 Americans besides Oswald who applied for a tourist visa that day. Goudet was one of them. As a matter of fact, Goudet was online in front of Oswald at the embassy. Okay, at the counsel's office, I should say. Now, the FBI gave that information to the Warren Commission, but they identified only 4 of the Americans who were online. The 5th one was deleted. The FBI said it couldn't come up with the information. The FBI knew it was Goudet. And the FBI suspected that Goudet was watching Oswald for the Central Intelligence Agency. So they omitted the information on Goudet, didn't give it to the Warren Commission. Now, this information came out, it was released by the National Archives in error. That's how we found it out. Okay, so here he is online in front of Oswald. He went to Mexico City at the same time that Oswald did. He's connected to the CIA for over 20 years. He also witnessed Oswald passing out leaflets in front of the trade center in the International Trade Center in New Orleans. And, you know, he knew a number of other people. You know, as an example, I mentioned he was one of the people who was able to identify Bannister. He knew David Ferry. He saw Oswald with these people. So he was a very interesting witness, somebody who should definitely have been followed up on, but the Warren Commission couldn't follow up on him because the FBI kept his identity from the Warren Commission's knowledge. So we don't even know if they would have called him had they been given the information, but they never had the information because the FBI made sure they didn't get it. So that's another example of people connected to the CIA that the Warren Commission was either unable to follow up on or intentionally didn't follow up on. I mean, this raises a lot of questions. I mean, these guys were in here, you know, J. Walton Moore, Goudet, these people are definitely CIA individuals. What did they know? What kind of relationship did they have with Oswald? What kind of relationship did Oswald have with the CIA? As a matter of fact, one of the remarks that Helms made before the HSCA was that there were people in the CIA who thought about using Oswald. And they never followed up and asked, well, what do you mean? What people? How were they going to use them? That was never explored. There's a lot of unanswered questions here. And, you know, all of these fingerprints of the CIA are very much on Oswald at this particular time. But the Warren Commission didn't follow up on it or couldn't follow up on it. Then you go back to another potential situation. Who was the unidentified individual at the International Trade Mart passing out leaflets with Oswald, Fair Play for Cuba leaflets? This guy was never located either. Another job the FBI was supposed to do to find this guy, they never found him. And as an example, in my book, one of the things that I found on the chapter that I did on Oswald was that Oswald was in touch with a lot of Cuban appearing individuals. And I put a section in the chapter on Oswald, and I called it the Latino factor. Many of these people were never identified, and he had all kinds of comings and goings with people who could have been anti-Castro, pro-Castro, could have been connected with the CIA, whatever. None of these people were identified, and to this day, we still don't know who they are. But they all had what witnesses who saw them said were the appearance of being Cuban. And so we're not going to know about that. So we got this guy that was out there in front of the Trade Center, the International Trade Center in New Orleans, passing out the Fair Play for Cuba leaflets, never located. He was described as 6 foot 19 or 20 and Cuban in appearance by Charles Paul Steele Jr., who was the other individual who was passing out leaflets with Oswald, who we were able to identify. And Steele said that after he looked at the stuff that he was handing out and saw that it was pro-Cuba, he quit the job. And Oswald paid him the couple of bucks that he was supposed to get anyway, but he quit. The other guy didn't. We still don't know who he is. And so it would be interesting to find out who these people were, because the questions are they connected to an intelligence agency? Were they pro-Castro? Were they anti-Castro? Why exactly was this individual in front of the Trade Center with Oswald? And the last guy I'm going to mention is a guy by the name of John Martino. Martino is a very interesting guy. Martino was mafia connected and he was CIA connected. He worked at the Deauville Hotel and Casino in Havana, Cuba. This hotel was leased to Alan Roth by Santos Trafficante Jr., the underworld boss in Florida. And Martino worked with underworld figures such as R.D. Matthews and Louis McWillie, both of whom knew Jack Ruby. And Martino and his son were arrested and imprisoned by Castro for about 3 years. His CIA activities, he was linked with David Morales, a CIA operative who claimed to have been involved in JFK's murder. He knew Rip Robinson, who was involved in the Bay of Pigs operation, a CIA operative. He also was involved in the abortive Pauly attempt to get 2 colonels out of Cuba, an operation that was supported by Ted Shackley, head of the CIA JM Wave operation in Miami. Now, he wrote a book about his imprisonment in Cuba, and he used his book to do a number of presentations in Dallas in late 1963. And one of those presentations, by the way, Sylvia Odio was supposed to have attended. And immediately after the assassination, Martino was involved in a disinformation campaign aided by Carlos Bringuer, the individual who was in the street altercation with Oswald in New Orleans. They started a disinformation campaign to immediately link Castro to the murder of JFK. And before he died, Martino confessed to a friend of his, to his wife, and to his son that he was a courier, served as a courier in the JFK assassination operation. He carried money and information. And one of the things that he said about Oswald was that Oswald was a patsy, that he was an individual that was manipulated into the assassination plot, never knew who he was working for, was in over his head, that he was supposed to have been spirited out of the country after the assassination and eliminated, but got into this altercation with Tippit, was arrested, and ultimately Martino said that they sent Jack Ruby in to kill Oswald in the Dallas jail. Now, Martino also worked for Johnny Rosselli, had connections to Rosselli. So he's connected to the mob and to the CIA. And Johnny Rosselli, we have to keep in mind, was also great pals with, I should say, Martino, who worked for Johnny Rosselli. Rosselli was also great friends with William Harvey, the originator of ZR Rifle, the CIA assassination group. One of the interesting things about Martino, in December 1963, he had an article published that mentioned the Sylvia Odio incident. The Sylvia Odio incident, where the three Cubans, including maybe Lee Harvey Oswald, came to visit her in Dallas, wasn't known until till mid 1964. This visit was not known, wasn't public information till the middle of 1964, yet Martino published an article on it in December of 1963. Martino, never called by the Warren Commission as well. So when you look at all of this, what do you got? You got a whole bunch of witnesses, particularly of the CIA, potentially connected to the CIA, that could have told us a lot about what was going on November 22nd, 1963. And the fact that they weren't called, that there's no information about what these folks were doing, who they were connected to, leaves us in a situation today where what we've got are more questions than answers, and leaves us in a spot that we really don't have a very clear view of what took place on November 22nd, 1963. You know, we know a lot about the medical evidence now. We know a lot about pretty much what happened in that particular regard. I think we do know that now, a lot better than we did back in 63 and in earlier periods. But all of the whys and the wherefores and the who was involved is just as confusing today as it was in 1963. And I don't think we've made any progress. And part of the reason for that is the failure of the Warren Commission, the failure of the FBI. You know, the idea that, you know, basically when witnesses would give them information, they would disregard it, they would change it, they would tell the witnesses, you didn't see that, you didn't hear that, it didn't happen. That's not an investigation. That kills any potential investigation right at the inception. And so today, I have to tell you, after looking at this, I'm 82 years old now. After looking at this from 63 to right now, I got to tell you, I feel like I'm in a hall of mirrors. And every time I look in one mirror, I see a reflection from another mirror. And I'm not sure that I can give any more definitive information other than the basic facts that we don't know a whole lot about what took place, even today, even with all of the testimony that we have.
Do you believe they conducted investigations, just haven't released information on it? Like I mentioned an example in the beginning of this podcast, but I do believe that like the FBI under the surface might have been looking into more things and feeling like maybe they could just bunk off whoever that person was that they found without anybody noticing or any reporting being done on it. Because if you really examine where we stand right now with what we don't know that hasn't been released yet, and whatever the future is going to hold with the JFK assassination research, you're not going to get an answer on anything then, because nobody ever pursued leads that should have been pursued, which really kind of, I mean, there's only one of two answers. They conducted investigations on their own and haven't released the information, or they just bothered to screw this whole thing up and it was only Oswald.
Well, you know, you know, it reminds me of one of the things that Bob Blakey said to me a long time ago when he talked about the documents that are still being held. And everybody's got big hopes that once those documents are released, we're going to have some answers. Blakey said there are no answers in there. He said there never were any answers in there, that they would never have been put into written form, that they would have never been held, that that information was long gone, would have been destroyed if it was ever created in the first place. You know, much of this could have been verbal. You know, if you were dealing with my hunch is that after looking at this over a long period of time, you probably have a rogue element of the Central Intelligence Agency that carried out this operation. The only role that the mafia played in it was the connection to Jack Ruby. They had to get in to kill Oswald. And Ruby was the guy to do it. And the proof of the pudding was he did it. You know, a lot of people say Jack Ruby was this kind of irresponsible person. Nobody would be able to depend on him to carry this out. He did it. That's the proof of the pudding.
Well, he said it when he was on the fourth floor, no, on the third floor of the Dallas Police Building, when two officers in their statement, when they were patting him down, they asked him why he did it, and he said, because you guys couldn't.
Yeah.
So I like to think it's the Dallas police that did it, but I also think that some of that Dallas police was not just corrupt in activities of knowing Ruby, but was more corrupt with organized crime.
Well, you could be right about the Dallas police because likely Ruby had help from the Dallas police in getting in there.
Oh, of course he did. He did not come down that ramp. Somebody let him in a door or
No,
something.
he didn't go down that ramp at all. And so the key point simply is, you know, the only role that they played in it would have been to send Jack Ruby in. And of course, look, there were connections between the CIA and the mob. They were working together for a while to kill Castro, and they were involved in other operations together dating all the way back to World War II. We know that. So, but if you have this small rogue group that committed the crime, it's a handful of men. They're all dead. They're all gone. And there wouldn't be any written evidence of this crime. They wouldn't have put all kinds of documents into the CIA files to describe what they did. I don't think the agency as an agency was involved. I think it was a rogue element in the agency. What the agency may have is what I like to call guilty knowledge. They may have known who the people were, but that information is not in writing and it's not in documents. So even if we have another big release, you know, every time I go through these documents that are released, I mean, 2/3 of it is nonsense, stuff that's of no importance whatsoever. You're actually wasting your time reading it, which may be part of the reason to release it. You know, send everybody down this non-productive path of wasting their time reading documents about benefits given to CIA officers or people working for the CIA. You know, what kind of job benefits they got. I mean, some of the stuff that's in there is ludicrous. So I just think that we'll probably never really get the answer. And I think it's just too late. And whatever opportunity we would have to assemble the facts would have to come from the existing records. But we know already that those records are totally incomplete. So what do we do?
We keep talking about it, keep trying to highlight it and keep it in the public's mind. I mean, it's lasted 60 years this long, so hopefully people just kind of wake up a little bit and decipher for themselves. Like when I do the clips for witness statements, I'm just giving you what they said. I'm not going to draw a conclusion of who did it. I think we get lost in the who did it and then I think we've discovered why. But I think now at this point, it's just trying to get everybody interested in the discussion again because, after this thing with Trump, it sparked up some interest in the JFK stuff. But it's really about getting people to understand, like, yeah, there's some dark stuff in the world. Everything doesn't run exactly how you want it to run. It could be organized crime, could be whatever you want, but it's just the fact that we need to understand our history a little bit, and we don't.
Let me say one thing. The only hope that we have potentially is AI. Maybe
Oh
we're
yeah,
going to be able to run all of this data, take all of the data that we have and feed it into an AI program and see what it tells us. And let's hope it's smarter than we are.
yeah.
Maybe that's good and maybe that's bad. Maybe we shouldn't be hoping it's smarter than we are because that's going to be a big problem. But maybe that may be our answer down the road. I often thought to myself, I wish we could have used one of those supercomputers that the CIA is using and put all this data in there and see what the machine says. Well, maybe we're going to be able to do that with AI. Let's hope so.
I don't mind it being smarter than me and taking over the world if it can just tell me who killed JFK would be nice.
We'll see what happens.
Mr. Keller, you giving me enough of your time. I appreciate you going through the detailed 7 witnesses you had there. Obviously, we talk about witness and tampering of evidence and documentation and statements and altering and all that. It's very kind of, I mean, it's pretty clear when you're able to give an example and look at the document, but a lot of people just, that goes over some people's heads because a lot of people haven't caught up to some of the JFK stuff or just haven't looked at a track record history of it. But I appreciate you doing the research that you have done for your book, especially coming on here and being able to talk about a lot of your work as well too, when it's the Tippit killing or whether it's just the JFK assassination as a whole. Is there a place where people can find any of your links?
Yeah, actually, I have the computer link is John F. Kennedy, Political Science Assassination Study. John F. Kennedy, Political Science Assassination Study.com. And I've got a lot of information on there. Interviews with Bob Blakey and Bert Griffin and so on that maybe people will find useful.
I'm gonna send you that name of that famous person that hung out with Lee Harvey Oswald when I find out what it is. I tried looking it up, I couldn't find it.
Okay, good. I'll look forward to seeing that.
And also, I appreciate the time. I'm gonna make sure I link all your links in the description. And thank you, everybody.
Keep
for
up the
listening.
good work. You're doing a great job on documenting all of this, and it's really important.
Send me some names if you think of any names. I'm always open to
certainly will.
suggestions. But thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank, and stay tuned for our next episode.